Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Greg Wilpert in Baltimore. This is part 2 of my interview with Todd Miller about the recently released report on the US-Mexico border and the industries that have been pushing for its militarization. Todd Miller is the author of the report titled More Than a Wall. Thanks again, Todd, for being here today.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
So let's turn now to what you in your report refer to as the border industrial complex. First, who are the main players, and how has their role evolved as in the last 20 or 30 years? And how and why has the management of border technology and border control shifted really, what seems like, from the government to these private companies?
Yeah, one really impressive statistic that we bring out in the report, which actually, I've been looking into these, the different companies and players in the borders, I guess you would have to call the border security industrial complex now for close to 8 or 9 years. And by that, I mean, I've been going to different expos and around the country, actually even around the world, and where you see different companies display their technologies. It's almost like going into a futuristic scientific crystal ball in a way of how industry is imagining the future to be of the border. And then, of course, the border is often a proving ground for the rest of the country, right? But but even so, when I was doing the research for this report, we came across the stat that there was $27 billion worth of contracts that were given out by Customs and Border Protection between the year 2006 and 2018. 27 billion, I should say, $27 billion in contracts. And then what I did was I tallied like the earlier annual budgets of the INS, or the Immigration and Naturalization Service, or what the Border and Immigration Enforcement Apparatus is, from 1975 to 1998. So you're talking, 23 years worth of accumulated budgets, and it was $26 billion. So there's been more contracts given out in this period of time between 2006 and 2018 than there were for these entire and accumulated annual budgets for a 22-year time period not too long ago. That's how much things have really, really, really shifted. We like the whole border and immigration enforcement apparatus. When you look at those earlier budgets, there was some emphasis put on them by the federal government, but it was definitely not a priority at all. And then that really, really shifted in the post 9/11 era, and then in around 2005, that's when you saw all these more and more money just being poured into like CBP, these new agencies, CBP and ICE, Customs and Border Protection, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and lo and behold, there were companies that were willing and ready to accept contracts. And one of the first turning points was a program known as the Secure Border Initiative, and the technology aspect was SBInet. And that's when you really could see that there was going to be a turning point, that CBP was really going to go look for private companies. Even there's a quote, and I have to paraphrase, from a higher up CBP official who told companies during an industry day for Customs and Border Protection, he said, "We're going to ask you how to do our job," right? So basically, the companies themselves, it's like, we're going to put it in your hands what this border enforcement apparatus is going to look like. And then, of course, Boeing got one of the first major contracts. Boeing, of course, aerospace and a military defense company contractor who is very much involved with a broader military industrial complex, right? And they get a $1 billion contract with Customs and Border Protection to design what effectively we're calling a virtual wall, which is a surveillance system that would be along the U.S.-Mexico border, and so that kind of jump-started what would be a number of companies getting all kinds of contracts. And, the Boeings of the world, the Lockheed Martins of the world, the General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman's, General Atomics. General Atomics is is the company that also in 2005 got a contract for drones or unmanned aerial systems. And that's when the drone program, or Customs and Border Protection, started its drone program. And just a number of different, so there's just a number of different companies that started to get contracts, and the budgets kept rising, so there's more contracts. And then eventually, as I just mentioned, the number gets up to $27 billion worth of contracts. So that's a lot of money going out to all kinds of private companies. And a lot of them, the traditional arms dealers that we talk about when we talk about U.S. military operations.
Now, when you call this a border industrial complex, you're clearly alluding to Eisenhower's reference to a military industrial complex. Now, just how are these corporations involved in driving border policy? I mean, that's the idea, I guess, of calling it a complex, that there's a real tight integration between the companies and the government. Talk to us about how this integration works.
Yeah, all the companies have clout in Washington, a lot of it. The bigger weapons companies, the Lockheed Martins, the General Dynamics, they just traditionally have a presence in the Beltway. They can get behind closed doors with key congressional figures. They have a lot of money that they can put towards campaign contributions. So in the report, we do follow all of this. We follow how companies, and I want to stress that's not only the big defense contractors. There's lots of newer security companies. There's IT companies, like IBM is one of the biggest contractors, so CBP, for example. But all these companies, and particularly the large arms, weapons, defense contractors, they have fleets. They have a lot of power in Washington. They know like who are the key congressional people to funnel money into their campaigns. So you follow the campaign contributions into the House Homeland Security Committee, and wow, there they are. They're flowing in there. Or if you look at who's the primary donors to key figures in the Appropriations Committee, you'll find that the same companies that are getting border contracts are also the top companies that are, making sure that the campaigns are well financed of key people who are determining how the budgets go, what kind of money is doled out, who gets the money, and that sort of thing. And then when you look at different reform or immigration reform, and I said that with a little hesitancy because every immigration reform package, if you notice, has a lot of border militarization packed in there. And so every time and there's some sort of immigration reform or a package comes to light, like for example, the 2013 Gang of Eight, who had the immigration reform passed through the Senate. You look at that time and you see all kinds of companies just lobbying every single day, sending people to lobby. And then when that bill comes out, there's nearly $45 billion that is designated towards the bill that never passed, of course, but it came out. There's $45 billion designated towards bolstering the border, and even specific technologies named in the bill that would go to certain companies, and the very companies that were doing the lobbying. So that's what we tried to follow. We followed this, okay, these companies are getting the contracts, but of course they want more contracts. And since they want more contracts, so try to follow the whole idea of a complex, that this thing is, working is on its own, right? It's growing for the sake of growth. And that definitely seems to be the case with what I would call, it's clearly not the military industrial complex that's even bigger and more massive budgets, but it's definitely a branch of that's coming to be. And really, that's something that we need to reckon with.
Well, one interesting aspect of your report is also this idea of the revolving door. Now, in theory, there should be laws, or there are laws actually, that are supposed to prevent people from moving from the industry to government and from government to the industry. But your report seems to have found that this doesn't seem to be working. Tell us a little bit more about that.
No, it's not at all. And I mean, you can look at many of the former commissioners of Customs and Border Protection, it seems like they retire, quote unquote, retire from CBP, and the next day they start their new job at a private firm. There's a lot of examples of this. One particularly big poignant example is Chertoff Group. Michael Chertoff was of course DHS secretary, and so he immediately after he retired from Department of Homeland Security, but boom, here's this quote unquote consulting security operation known as the Chertoff Group, and then he hires on a former CBP commissioner to head like the border part of it, right? And so all of a sudden you have all these these people with all kinds of insider information, especially in these governmental organizations, who just really seamlessly moved from the public sector to the private sector, and of course, and sometimes we'll move. Sometimes it's the case that they'll move from the private sector back to the public sector, and the revolving door. If there's any impediments or any sort of laws trying to impede that from happening, whatever they are not strong enough. People are definitely going through that revolving door without too much problem at all.
Now, finally, what have been the consequences of the militarization of the U.S. border for the actual people who they're trying to control, that is, for the immigrants?
The consequences are dire. The prevention through deterrence, the whole point of prevention through deterrence is to stop people from crossing traditional places and then force them into places that are too dangerous, desolate. You can't carry enough food, you can't carry enough water. It's really difficult to cross. And one of the threats of crossing through those areas, of course, is death, right? And that when that prevention through deterrence policy first came to be in 1994, they actually used the word mortal threat as a deterrence, right? So if somebody died, then the word would get back to people in Mexico or people in Central America. Don't do that because you might die. And of course, so many people have died over the years, and I've been working on these issues for years and years here in Southern Arizona. I met one woman who had been out in the desert for 26 days. She was really lucky to be alive. The only reason why she is alive is because she found a puddle and she drank out of a puddle for several days, and finally somebody found her. I have met another person who she said she was walking through a rocky mountain range, and they ran out of water, they ran out of food. And then she said she eventually started seeing hallucinations. And then they arrived to a road, and she described a scene at the road where she looked around her, and she described several of the people that she was with in her group, their noses spontaneously bursting with blood. And then she passed out, and when she woke up, she was in a hospital. And according to her, she thought, well, I was connected to like a machine that probably brought me back to life when she told me the story. So she was actually one of the lucky ones, right? Because so many people do not survive. Of the 8,000 people, of the remains that have been found, close to 8,000, there's thousands of other people who are looking for lost loved ones who they think perished in the desert. The desert is so vast. And that's one of the biggest issues that when we start thinking about this militarization of the border and all these companies cashing in on it, right? They're making money off of a system that really literally pushes people into these really dangerous and desolate areas, and people are dying. And if they're not dying, they're getting arrested, put into prison. They're going to private prisons, and private prisons are making money. So there's a lot of money being made on either death or suffering of people who are crossing the border.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there for now. We've been following this story, of course, for a long time now and continue to do so. I was speaking to Todd Miller, author of the Transnational Institute report, More Than a Wall. Thanks again, Todd, for having joined us today.
Thank you very much. It was great.
And thank you for joining the Real News Network.
Thanks a lot for watching. Appreciate it. But do us one more solemn favor. hit the subscribe button below. You know you want to. Stay up on the videos.